Both the Trump and Biden campaigns were on the trail in Arizona on Thursday. Our CBS News Battleground Tracker poll shows Biden with a 5-point edge in the state. President Trump won there in 2016. Their visits come one day after the vice presidential candidates faced off in their first and only debate. Ed O'Keefe reports on how it's all impacting the race for the White House.
With President Trump stuck at the White House, the Democratic ticket isn't slowing down, campaigning today for the first time together in Arizona and appearing with Cindy McCain, the wife of the former Republican Party nominee. Vice President Pence also visited the Grand Canyon State.
Hello, Arizona!
The president, meanwhile, took shots from afar at Kamala Harris.
This monster that was on stage with Mike Pence was totally unlikable. She's a communist.
Biden shot back at the president.
It's despicable. It's so beneath the office of the presidency. And the American people are sick and tired of it.
For many voters in Arizona, the president's handling of the pandemic is a top concern. His supporters claim he was unfairly blamed.
Right out and say it. They're constantly accusing Trump for the 210,000 people that have died of coronavirus. First of all, number one, that's not a true number.
But polls show the prolonged COVID crisis, and with it the economic downturn, has dragged the president down in the polls. The CBS News Battleground Tracker shows Biden leading in enough states to get over the 270 electoral votes he'll need to win. He's up in key states, including Florida, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, thanks to growing support among independent voters, women, and senior citizens.
Us old people aren't dumb. You know, they can see what's going on. You know, Trump has not been a good president.
Last night's vice presidential debate gave Pence and Harris a chance to answer questions about taxes, climate change, and race. Instead, they spent most of their time attacking the other, as Harris focused on the administration's response to the pandemic.
Well, the American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country.
And Pence tried getting Harris to say whether she and Biden want to add seats to the Supreme Court.
If somehow you win this election, going to pack the Supreme Court to get your way.
Harris didn't answer the question, and neither did Biden today.
They'll know my opinion of court packing when the election is over.
One moment many will remember from last night's debate, a fly that sat on the vice president's head for more than a minute. The Biden campaign quickly seized on the moment.
And Ed O'Keefe joins me now for more. Ed, I have to tell you, I thought that the debate was really interesting. And we saw both Vice President Pence and Senator Harris dodge or not completely answer some questions during the debate. I think the former high school debater in me was really impressed by how often they sidestepped some of the questions that they didn't want to answer. But what topics really stood out for you in terms of what they didn't want to answer? And how do you think that that's going to affect how the voting populace looks at those candidates?
So you're the one that liked the fact that they didn't answer questions. Okay, well, that's interesting.
I thought it was interesting. I thought it was very telling.
Yeah, exactly. Look, two skilled debaters, two telegenic candidates who certainly decided to answer questions in their own way and not necessarily directly answer the questions. I think the one that was most troubling for many has to have been the fact that Susan Page, the moderator, asked at the top, hey, have you talked to your candidate about potential presidential disability or issues with succession? Should there be a need? That's a totally relevant question to be asking right now, given A, that the 74-year-old president is laid up with COVID, and B, that by Inauguration Day, if he wins, Joe Biden would be 78 years old. We've never had presidents elected or sworn in that old. So it's a totally fair question to ask. Neither of them answered it. On questions of the Supreme Court, especially regarding abortion, neither of them really gave an answer on that one as well, because they both realized for different reasons it's a politically sensitive issue for them. You're alienating people perhaps on the right in states you need to win if you're Kamala Harris by discussing the fact that Democrats have a more open view on abortion rights, whereas the vice president understands you talk too much about the fact that you are opposed to abortion rights and you could be turning off millions of female voters that are already turning their backs on the Trump-Pence ticket. So there's another good example. Pence wouldn't say whether he thinks climate change is an existential threat. On the issue of the Supreme Court, Harris, like Biden, wouldn't talk about whether they agree with the concept of court packing or adding seats on the Supreme Court in the future so Democrats can make up for the conservative majority it's likely to have after Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed, if she's confirmed, later this year. So, you know, lots of interesting ground covered, a far more civil affair. but you didn't walk away with many answers completely given out by these two candidates.
Well, or you could argue that you did get your answers in their lack of answers.
There you go.
And did you learn anything new about the candidates or the campaigns that they're running through the debate?
If you're somebody who doesn't know who they are, yes. But if you're somebody who's been paying attention, no. And who are you ultimately trying to reach? Well, both of those groups. You need to remind your base, inspire them, get them to turn out, and they may be more familiar with you. But for people who may still be making up their minds, or who may have tuned in with legitimate curiosity into, hey, who are these two that could have to step in for one of those two candidates? You would have learned some things potentially, at least about their style, their delivery, how they make an argument, maybe a little bit about themselves. Harris, especially in the beginning, tried to deliver a bit of a biographical message when asked whether she had had that conversation with Biden about whether or not she'd ever have to step in for him. But beyond that, not necessarily much new.
Well, it definitely was more civil than the presidential one last week. There were still, of course, a couple of attempted interruptions. What are people saying about both the interruptions and how the different candidates handled those interruptions? And do you think that it will play with any particular groups of voters out there?
Vice presidential debates don't typically move the needle too much, or certainly not in a helpful way. They might actually hurt more than help. So we'll see whether there's any real discernible effect from this. Certainly the television ratings suggest that there was less interest in it. And again, that's partly because they're the number two. They're not the number one. It felt like and dare we say, normal debate where two skilled debaters who didn't want to answer the questions could engage in a far more civil way. I mean, certainly it was tense. They had sharp disagreements on a host of issues, but it wasn't nasty. The volume didn't really go up and down that much. And at the end of the night, they turned to each other and were civil about it. Couldn't shake hands, but apparently exchanged some words on stage from a distance before they left. So, if you were looking for a little bit of normalcy in your politics, as rare as it is these days, you might have gotten it.
Well, it was considered to be some of the most consequential vice presidential debating that has ever happened. Tell our viewers why this face-off was considered so significant.
Because of what's going on with the president right now. There has been legitimate conversation in this town and concern about whether Pence should even be out and about right now. Should he and other members of the line of succession be in quarantine, or certainly at least be tracked more closely in the event that something were to happen to the president? So it was a reminder that, that is a primary responsibility of a vice president to potentially step in if something happens to the president. And the other issue, again, is the fact that both of these candidates would be the oldest ever sworn in. They both have checkered medical pasts. And so there are concerns about that, and people want to know about them. And look, in the case of Harris, the history being made by her mere presence on the ticket is reason enough to wonder what she would be like and to, be intrigued by it or to wonder how she would potentially serve as the first female vice president. So certainly different reasons for different people. But it was, I can't really think of another one, you're right, recently that would have mattered as much. Certainly the one that I think had more intrigue in recent history was the 2008 debate between Joe Biden and Sarah Palin, given that Sarah Palin was so unknown by most Americans, even 5 weeks into her campaign at that point.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. That was an interesting one, too. All right, last question for you, Ed. Obviously, the future of the debates are a little bit in limbo right now. Wednesday's debate might have actually been the last chance for the Trump and Biden campaigns to reach voters on a national shared stage, at least. So what do you think it might mean for these campaigns going forward? And what's the real strategy here?
Well, I think they went about 4 or 5 rounds today on should we or shouldn't we, where and when and how. Right now, at least, it looks like both of them are going to skip next Thursday's debate in Miami, which is a shame because it's the one that would have involved undecided voters asking questions about whether or not, or asking questions of the two candidates. It's often one of the better ones because that dynamic of having to answer a real person's question with cameras rolling is far different than a moderator who asks a question that gets ignored. So, we'll see whether or not they can reschedule that. Both campaigns seem to be open to the idea of debating on October 22nd. That is the third scheduled debate in Nashville, but that's just with the moderator, not with a crowd. The president today suggested that the crowd could show up on October 22nd instead, and then why don't we reschedule to October 29th and add one there as well? Biden campaign says no, our calendar's booked. October 22nd is also one of the latest debates ever held anyway, and at that point, you're only about 10 days out, give or take, from the actual election. So at that point, it's like the cake is baked. Let's go focus on just sealing a deal in various states. So we'll see. You know, and obviously what's lost is the chance to ask them questions again, to see how they respond under pressure. And for an undecided voter who might have legitimately been looking forward to the opportunity to sit and watch them, you know, they're going to have to go back and watch the DVR of the first one.
I'm not sure I'm ready to do that. All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you.
Take care.